Welcome back to Boilers Extra. I'm Nathan Baird from Indianapolis Star.
Sam King from the Journal Inquirer.
We are in the middle of the resumption of football. Obviously, Purdue plays against Illinois on Saturday. We are going to have Jeremy Werner from Illini Inquirer by to talk a little bit about that team and about this rivalry and this game and kind of how Illinois fans look at it. I was actually just had a buddy of mine text me as I was driving back from Lafayette to Indianapolis today about how Purdue has had the upper hand in this series for a while now, and I kind of want to get his opinion of what Jeremy's opinion of how Illinois fans are looking at this. But first, let's talk basketball. We have not had a chance to talk about Rivers Knight, who on Sunday became the third commit to Purdue's 2026 class, along with his new current teammate at La Lumiere, Jacob Weber, and Luke Girdle, the combo guard from Mount Vernon. And Sam, this was kind of the natural progression of this class. You've got a guard, lead guard, off guard, whatever Luke Girdle ends up being for Purdue, some combination thereof. You've got that locked up. You've got in Jacob Weber, you've got a true wing, big time shooter, elite shooter, one of the best in the country. And they needed to get some size. And this was a very natural progression to lead to Rivers Knight.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to this season and what is possible, but if you're the coaching staff, you can't just rest on your laurels because you have a program. You have to think about the future. And for a long time, Luke Girdle was the only commit in next year's class. So now to get two who are at the same school within a matter of a month, maybe I can't remember exactly when Jacob Weber committed. But that is big. And, there were two other targets who committed elsewhere this week. But when the Rivers Knight news came, I kind of figured that the writing was on the wall, at least with one of those, because it was a similar type of position player. And, just going through and reading what you did on him, talking to Rivers Knight, talking to his high school coach, I kind of get a sense here that Purdue may have found kind of a diamond in the rough because of an injury and some teams backed off of him. And if he comes back healthy and, based on what you wrote, faster, stronger, more muscular, it could be a kind of a home run get.
Yeah. So for people who aren't familiar with Rivers Knight, he's 6'9", 215. He'll be a 4 for Purdue for the most part. From talking to him, he's pretty confident that he'll be able to guard 2 through 5 when Purdue switches there. He's athletic enough to do that. Feels like he's quick enough to do that. He did have, and this is where he reminded me a little bit of Raleigh Burgess. They're not the same kind of player. He's a couple inches shorter. He can, I guess, plausibly give you minutes at the 5, but that's not really going to be his strength, I don't think. But in the same way that Raleigh Burgess had to overcome these injuries in high school that interrupted his development, interrupted his recruiting, the same thing sort of happened to Rivers Knight. Last May, Purdue was already on him. They were watching him. I think they were one of the few teams that was in on him that early. He didn't have a huge offer list. They went and saw him play, and I believe it was Memphis early on. This was in May. Then he got hurt at a EYBL event in Kansas City. And it's really just characterized as a severely turned ankle. But when he talks about it, when Rivers Knight talks about it, he says that there were fractures. He says that there was tendon damage. So even though they didn't have to have surgery, it was a pretty substantial injury. It kept him out for a couple of months. And I think, as everyone knows, for a 2026 class guy to miss the summer of 2025 for the most part is not ideal. But Purdue stayed on him. Purdue had remained interested in him. This is just a thing that you've seen from Matt Painter over the years, where I feel like they follow through on these guys despite these injuries. And they end up sometimes, like you say, getting someone that maybe other people had backed off of and were waiting to see how he would respond. And Purdue kind of trusted its gut here. PJ Thompson went up a couple of times to see him. Matt Painter went up a couple of times to see him. And they were going up to see Jacob Weber too, doing their due diligence on a guy who had just committed to them. But they were also up there recruiting Rivers Knight. And from talking to him, kind of a good Southern boy. He's been around a few places. He lived in Alabama for a while. He's most recently was living in North Carolina before he came to La Lumiere. And he's not the level of shooter that Jacob Weber is. I don't know that hardly anybody is, but it's also a big part of his game. Despite his size, he's someone that the name that he brought up was Mason Gillis as someone who wasn't like of substantial size, but was physical enough that he could play the 4 and was then skilled enough that it made him an asset in the kind of offense that Purdue likes to run.
Well, Mason Gillis, you weren't here when he was on the roster, but he was a fan favorite because he wasn't a guy that was going to go out and give you 20 points, except one game where Penn State decided to not guard him and he hit 9 threes or whatever it was, the most insane thing I've ever seen, especially compared to the rest of his career scoring wise. But was a fan favorite because he did a lot of different things. He could guard people, he could rebound, he would do the nasty, dirty work, diving on the floor, kind of like the model of what Purdue's program is, just kind of grit and tenacity, and maybe not McDonald's All-Americans, but you get hard workers who kind of fit the mold of what Gene Katie built and what Matt Painter has, continued to build on for the last 2 decades. If he can live up to that at all, I think Purdue fans will love him.
So that's the latest on basketball recruiting. We're going to have a lot more basketball to talk about next week. Big Ten Media Day is in Chicago. We're both going up for that. We will probably do sort of a preview episode for that to talk a little bit about how we voted for all conference and really where Purdue fits into that. It's obviously a highly anticipated season, and I think you're going to see them represented pretty well on those lists that start coming out next week, including a couple that are associated with our network. But we're going to switch over to football now, and we're going to bring on Jeremy Werner from Illini Inquirer. He's going to talk with us a little bit about Saturday's game. And Jeremy, I wanted to start off, thanks for joining us. How much of before we talk about the specifics of this game, the last 20 years, Purdue has won 15 of the last 20 meetings. So I guess that's actually 22 years. They missed a couple of years. I'm just curious from an Illinois fan's standpoint, because a lot of those years, it wasn't like Purdue was way above Illinois in terms of stature. Like they frankly were both among the worst programs in Power 5 for a long part of that stretch. But do Illinois fans look at this rivalry as there being some sort of a bugaboo right now that there is with Purdue, that even last year, like what that loss could have meant to an otherwise really successful Illinois season, and Purdue couldn't beat anybody last year.
By the way, I did vote Purdue #1 in my preseason basketball, just so people know that.
I think you'll have a lot of company.
Yeah, I think I will. No, I mean, I've always looked at Illinois and Purdue kind of as sister schools. They have a lot of similarities. They're 90 miles apart. Everyone knows you meet at the Beef House, and but they're basketball programs. They're basketball schools, right?
Yeah.
And football has kind of had these blips of success, whether it's the time with Drew Brees and Kyle Orton, as a Bears fan I love, and obviously with what Jeff Brom did. But they're just consistently doing it has been very difficult for these programs. Yet even in the years that Purdue is down, like Darrell Hazel, I think his final game was coaching against Illinois, and he got a win against Tim Beckman's team, or was it Lovie Smith?
That was his last win for sure.
I think he got fired a week after that or something like that. But a team like that, or last year, maybe the worst Purdue team you guys have covered, like that team came in and probably should have beat Illinois. Like the second half, they dominated. Got to overtime. Like Illinois was fortunate Luke Altmaier was not called for a fumble because it looked like a fumble. And he scores on that drive to force overtime. And then they needed a 2-point sack to get out of there with a victory. And that was a 10-win Illinois team. So yeah. I know everyone's going to look at this like Illinois, this is a trap game because they just beat USC to bounce back from that terrible loss in Indiana. And they got #1 Ohio State next week. It better not be. Just based on their history, Bielema was 1-3 against Purdue while at Illinois. They lost, the 2022 Big Ten West title playing game to Purdue when they were favored. I think it was by 13 points in that game. Got their butts kicked by Ryan Walters in his first year. That was a bad Purdue team, won 44-19. And kept early Illinois. That was one of their many losses that kept them from a bowl game. So they should not be overlooking Purdue because their history against Purdue, even when Purdue's not great, is bad. So it's a rivalry that Illinois has not won yet enough. I do think Brett Bielema can turn that, especially with Barry Odom having to clean up the mess that Ryan Walters left. But I don't think they should be overlooking this one. Illinois should have a chip on its shoulder in this one that they need to keep that cannon around because they're a better program right now, but it hasn't shown itself in the rivalry the last couple of years.
Well, Jeremy, as Purdue's offensive coordinator, Josh Henson, put Monday, the head coach for Purdue the last 2 years probably knew enough about how to attack that Illinois defense and get the most out of his teams. And that was the two best games he coached, was the 2 games against Illinois while he was here. But where does this Purdue team kind of maybe give some threats, at least with what Purdue's done offensively so far this season against that Illinois defense?
Yeah, I think that's the side of the ball that you look at, that Purdue can be pretty competitive in this game, because Illinois' defense has not been great. There is some talent there, especially up front. I think Gabe Akis is going to have a pretty good day. He's one of the best edge rushers in the country, one of the best in the Big Ten. They're better up front, I think, against the run than they were the last couple of years playing against Devin Mockabee. James Thompson, a transfer from Wisconsin, has been really good. Tommy Wadurajaye, really talented kid out of Florida State, but he's 4 school in 4 years. And Illinois has really unlocked some his potential this year. So they've been pretty good against the run outside of the second half against Indiana, but their secondary has been really thin. Xavier Scott, their best player back there, out basically for the season. Brett Bielema hasn't ruled him out completely, but he's basically out for the season. He's their starting nickel. So a guy like Michael Jackson, who plays in that slot, might find some opportunities against a green but talented Tanner Heckel, who had to draw the assignment of Mekhi Lemon. I know you guys know how good Mekhi Lemon is. Made some fantastic plays. But it's a defense that is giving up a lot of yards. They're not an overwhelming defense. They just want to keep things in front of them. But they have had some tackling issues this year, dating back to Indiana game. They've given up a lot of yards in the passing game. We know what Ryan Brown did to Illinois last year with Ryan Walters calling the plays of all people. So Ryan's a talented kid. I know he's got to make some better decisions, but he's getting better. So I do think they're going to have some success moving the ball. But Illinois is going to hope that they can take advantage of his miscues, of his decisions, and that they can really get after him, because that Purdue offensive line is really struggling. But the secondary does give him some chances, and if Devin Mockabee gets to the second level, we all know how feisty of a runner he is. He might have a chance to break some tackles. But offensively, I just watching Purdue, how do they slow down Luke Altmaier in this offense? That's the biggest question I have, because Luke doesn't turn it over very much. I think Purdue's going to have to force some takeaways to keep Illinois' offense in check. But I think Purdue would have to score in the 30s to have a chance to win this one.
Yeah, and Purdue very famously, at least around here, has one takeaway this year, and that came on a safety blitz strip sack against Notre Dame. And other than that, they have not been able to create very many takeovers. You mentioned Ryan Brown, and there's one team in the country that is definitely not going to overlook Ryan Brown, and it's the one that he came in and kind of danced all over last season. How much talk I saw Brett Bielema's comments about Ryan Brown and just kind of comparing the growing confidence he's seeing in him just on film from last year, this year. How has Illinois handled any similar quarterbacks they've seen so far this year, the kind of dual threat guys? Because Purdue right now, one of the things I will give Josh Henson a lot of credit for is how creative they've been. I mean, the last 2 weeks, Brown has been on the receiving end of a trick play where they're trying to have somebody else throw the ball back to him. They want the ball in his hands in space, and they're not just going to have him line up and be a conventional quarterback. So maybe there's not a lot of teams that have gotten that creative against Illinois, but just that general idea of the dual threat guys, how does Illinois match up there?
They're not that aggressive. They want to contain. They want to make him a pocket passer. That's what they're going to try and do, I think, with Ryan Brown. They didn't really have a book on him last year, right? So everything was kind of a surprise of what he did. And I think there's clearly a good athlete. I think he's a gamer. From everything I've heard, he's a really good leader. So he's got that to him. But I think the issue with him has been some of the decision-making things that I've seen on film. So it's about making him a pocket passer. That's what they did with Aiden Childs last year. That's what they did with Jalen Daniels last year. It's what they did with Lenora Sellers in the bowl win. They contained him in the pocket. They said, hey, if you want to beat us, you're going to have to beat us with your arm, beating us downfield with some of these throws, throwing into zone coverage. So I don't, as good as, as bad as Purdue's been against, the pressure, I think Illinois is really going to try and generate pressure from their front four and then just try to contain him in the pocket. They've used a spy. Malachi Hood's kind of their backup middle linebacker, but really good athlete. They used him against Northwestern, Michigan State, South Carolina, to where they get more speed on the field just to contain him and make him a pocket passer. That's where they've had success. Now, you can nickel and dime you down the field, probably get into the red zone, but then when that field gets shorter, you're going to have to make some good decisions. You're going to have to run the ball really well. So I would expect Illinois to use that same kind of thing, because they don't want to get beat by his legs. They don't want to get just beat by his athleticism. Make him a pocket passer. Make him beat you with his arm.
Jeremy, I know a lot of Purdue fans probably point at what happened 2 weeks ago and say, well, if Indiana can do that, we should have some success. But that, to me, seems like more of an anomaly. It was probably just one of those games where things snowballed and it became what it was. Was that kind of an outlier from what you've seen the rest of the year and through camp with Illinois?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone that knows Kurt Signetti is if you give him an inch, he's going to step on your throat. Like that's what he's going to do, and that's what that team has been coached to do. He's an amazing coach, and Illinois had a punt block, went for a touchdown early in that game, and then they just had a few plays that didn't go their way, a few third downs that didn't go their way, and all of a sudden it's 28-7. And by that point, the game was over. And Illinois knew it. In the second half, Indiana just absolutely blasted them away. It was a bad showing. I do think it shows that while Illinois is a top 25 team, they're not a top 10 team because they just don't have that level of talent, right? They don't have the level of talent to overcome miscues like that. So they have to be a well-coached team. They have to be a team that doesn't shoot itself in the foot. And to be honest with you, as good as they were against USC, they fumbled twice inside the 5-yard line. One of those was a controversial call that it was a fumble, but they got away with that. So it's a team that's got to play a little bit cleaner, but they're finally starting to protect for Luke Altmaier. That was the biggest takeaway against USC, who was the number one team in sacks and tackles for loss basically in the country leading into that game. They finally got downhill, were able to run the football, really protected him. And if you give him time and you give Barry Lunny, who's probably going to be an FBS coach in the next year or two, if you give those guys the full playbook, it's a really good offense. This offense is really good, but it's not a domineering defense. They're going to have to win scoring a lot of points. So I do think it shows a team like Purdue that, hey, if we can force Illinois into some miscues or we take advantage of their miscues, we could beat them, or we could hang around in the fourth quarter and make it a game. It's just when their offensive line plays like their offensive line should play, this is a pretty good offense. The problem was the first 4 games, they did not. This 5 starters returning from last year's team that beat Michigan, beat South Carolina in the trenches. And you guys know the talent that was in those Michigan and South Carolina defensive fronts. We didn't see that early in the season. It sounds like they were just overthinking things. They just got more towards being the aggressor, getting downhill, double teaming people. When you got Caden Fagan, 6'3", 250, you give him a couple yards of changing that line of scrimmage, he's going to get 4 yards of carry. So that was a big change. I think that's going to help them moving forward because they've had slow starts on the offensive line the last couple of years, but mid-year they've always turned it around and really gained momentum.
Real quick before we let you go, you asked me for a prediction on this game for a thing I wrote for you earlier this week. Did you have one yet that you've put down for how you think this game's going to turn out?
Yeah, I think I have us going the over. I do think Purdue's going to score some points. I think they're going to be able to move the ball a little bit. They just got to not have the turnover issues that they've had. I just do think Illinois is going to score too. So I had 38-23. I think it's going to be a game at halftime. I think it could be a game in the third quarter. I just do think in the fourth quarter at some point that Illinois offense will break away a little bit. And if Purdue makes a mistake or two on offense, as they've kind of done each game, I just think Illinois can take advantage of that on the offensive side of the ball. So I expect Purdue to be feisty, but I do think Illinois will be focused. I don't think they'll be looking ahead to Ohio State because Brett Bielema has only lost 5 games. Is a favorite in his career, and none of those have happened in Illinois, I should say, but none of those have happened the last 2 years. This is a veteran team. I think they like to say that 1-0 mentality. It's Brett Bielema's favorite saying. So I think they'll be focused on keeping that trophy. And I do think, like Purdue fans, Illinois is happy that Ryan Walters is not on the sideline because, as you guys said, like he was just an X factor. He knew that defense completely, knew how to scheme them up, and obviously he knew how to attack Illinois defensively as well. So, I think Illinois is pretty happy, even though Barry Odom can call up Ryan Walters because those guys know each other pretty well.
They do. Thanks a lot, Jeremy Werner, Illini Inquirer. Make sure you follow him for intel coming from the Illini side of things, and safe travels to West Lafayette this weekend.
All right, see you guys Saturday.
Thanks,
Jeremy.
I think Jeremy brought up a good point there, maybe sort of accidentally. He was talking about like the stats, like USC came in the last week leading the nation or one of the nation leaders in sacks and tackles for loss. Some of that came against Purdue, if people might remember, but we're only a few games in. And I was looking at Purdue stats, and it's like, how much of this is concrete? How noisy are the stats still? So I wanted to look at Purdue defense on the first. They're giving up 4.5 plays of 20 or more yards per game. That's the worst in the Big Ten. They're tied with, I can't remember who, but they're tied with somebody for worst in the Big Ten at that number. They're 16th in yards allowed per play, 6.09 yards per play. That jumps up to 6.55 if you take out FBS games. They are only 14th in rushing yards allowed per play. That's 4.3 per play. That's not good, but it looks good compared to where they are as a pass defense, where they're 18th in yards allowed per attempt. That's 8.7 per attempt, but it jumps up to 10.2 again when you take out that Southern Illinois game, which again was a team that a few times in that game marched the ball pretty well against Purdue. So I guess just how much, if you had to diagnose what you think the biggest thing that Purdue needs to have accomplished during this off week and the lead into this game? We're talking to players this week, talking to Mike Scherer, a lot of discussion about things like communication, fundamentals, attention to detail. And I understand, I think some people might hear that and say, no, you need better players. I'm like, well, I think that's the criteria that will decide who plays more as we get farther into the season.
Yeah. And, Mike Scherer made a good point, and Barry Odom made the same point a few weeks ago. It was sometimes you see the guy who gets beat, but you don't see why he got beat. And sometimes it's because the other guy didn't do his job. And then, the guy that on camera looks like he's at fault and, in some ways is. It's also something that happened on the other side of the field, whether you read a run and tried to fill a gap and then you get beat over the top because the safety's not there, whatever it is. Those things have to be cleaned up, I guess, recognition more than anything. Some numbers that I just went over the last two games when I was writing something yesterday. Purdue's in the last two games given up 32 plays of 10 yards or more. And I think that's not including a pass interference call, I think it was against USC. And
doesn't include a kickoff return touchdown either.
Yeah, that exactly. And 11 of those were 20 or more yards. So you cannot beat teams, any team left on their schedule, giving up, that many big chunk yardage plays. And you got to make the punter come out on the field at some point. You're not going to beat anybody if you never see the other team's punter. So defense has to clean up a lot of things. I don't even think it's so much the takeaways. You have to get manageable down and distance situations for your defense, 3rd and 8s, even 3rd and 5s. And right now you're getting teams into 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, or sometimes not even getting them into 3rd down situations to give your team a chance to get off the field.
Well, it's hard to game plan takeaways and turnovers. It's hard to game plan for them as an offense. You don't go into a game thinking when we turn the ball over, this is how we'll respond. You just don't do that. And similarly on defense, you can't go in and say, well, we're going to take the ball away here and then we're going to do this. And the one way I will say that there is a correlation there is, why do takeaways and turnovers happen? They happen often because from an interception standpoint, either a ball carrier isn't protecting the ball, or you get to the quarterback and you get a strip sack like they did against Notre Dame, or you're causing him to throw, you're deflecting a pass, or you're causing him to hurry a throw into coverage, that sort of thing. And this is where I think that Purdue has to start to get some sort of a pass rush going. The loss of TJ Lindsey, I think, is big. It's not like he was out just wreaking havoc in the Big Ten or in any of the games yet, but he was a talented guy. He was a starter for a reason. He was an important guy on this defensive front where they don't necessarily have a lot of dynamic players. At least they haven't shown themselves to be dynamic players. And one of the changes that we thought this defense had to make this year was to get more of that natural pass rush, guys up front who can beat guys and get to the quarterback so you don't have to blitz. It was interesting that Jeremy kind of brought that up again in a sort of a backwards way about Illinois as it relates to Purdue's offensive line, because Purdue's offensive line has had pass protection issues. That might make things easier on an Illinois defense, an Illinois secondary that has had coverage problems, because you don't have to take guys out of your back 7 and have them go at the ball as much, because maybe your front four can win those battles. And I think that's something that Purdue has to start to find a way to do this week, especially against Luke Altmaier, because you look at his numbers and they're not off the charts amazing, but it's something like 11 touchdowns and no interceptions, and he's averaging something like 9 yards per pass attempt. That is upper tier of the Big Ten kind of production. And he's a veteran. And I feel like they're in a weird spot now because they're, you can't assume that they can create cloudy pictures for him in the scheme alone, because I think this team is still figuring things out schematically and who's got to be on the field. I think this pass rush has to start winning to buy the back end of this defense some what do I want to say, like some margin for error.
Yeah, and it really starts probably with the start of the game. Purdue has played catch up here the last 2 weeks, and when you can get ahead and then hopefully you can dictate what the other team is having to do a little bit, then you can, if you force Illinois to have to pass back its way back into a game, you know what's going to happen. And Purdue's kind of been on its heels the last couple of weeks, whether it drops 8 into coverage and then teams just run the ball down your throat, or, you try to stop the run, you get beat over the top. It seemed like Purdue just, was damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. It was just the team was going to adjust and beat you the other way. So, if you get into these situations where you can kind of dictate what the other team's offense has to do a little bit, maybe that helps you. But Purdue's got to play from ahead, and that was a problem we talked about all year last year, is how little Purdue had a lead in actual game all season long. And outside of that Indiana State game, it was not very many minutes total. So I think it starts there. You've got to find a way to get up 14-0 or get up 14-3 early, and then kind of dictate a little bit of how the game's going to play out.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, the thing that I thought Purdue had to accomplish either last week or this week on offense was you've got to unlock this running game somehow.
Right.
Like Devin Mockabee, I don't think he's one of the most dynamic players in the Big Ten, to use that word again, but he's more than just a reliable try-hard guy too. I think he's a talented guy. He's a veteran guy. He's done what he's done in his career for a reason. He's done it pretty well against Illinois too in the past. But the Notre Dame game went nowhere. Now, some of that is, again, they are in some negative situations as far as having to chase points. And once there's a certain point of the game where once you're doing that, you're not going to run the ball a lot, but that doesn't really affect how well you run the ball when you try it. And that's still not good. Right now, they're 17th in the Big Ten in rushing yards per attempt at 3.06. If you take out the Southern Illinois game, it drops down to 2.45, which is miserable, is brutal. And those numbers aren't sack adjusted, but they're also not adjusted to include the only running play of 20-plus yards they had this year, which was the Ryan Brown pick up the lateral and run it, which wasn't even supposed to be a lateral. So it's kind of an accident that it even qualifies as a run play. And it doesn't include McAllister's 10-yard, 10-11, whatever it was, fake punt run at Notre Dame. Those are their big explosive running plays from the last couple of weeks. It's guys who they're not even supposed to be run plays. So conventionally. So I will say I think it should be refreshing for Purdue fans to hear. Coming out of the USC game, I was trying to ask about the run game, and Josh Henson kind of pushed back on it, it's not as bad as it looks. And when I asked Barry Odom about it after the Notre Dame game, he was taking more of let me go see what the film says. I can't remember what the stats are with sacks and stuff, and I think there was only one sack, so sacks had nothing to do with it. But this week, they both came in, especially Josh Henson, the first thing out of his mouth when we talked to him, nobody even had to ask him really about the run game specifically. He's like, we have to run the ball better. And it's going to make this, what they do have with Ryan Brown and these playmakers in the receiving core, it's going to make them better if they can get this run game and make defenses respect them on the ground.
Yeah, and that's maybe where I give Josh Henson some credit. I think he's done a really good job play calling to mask areas that they're not good at right now. Because you put up 30 at Notre Dame and you can't run the ball at all. But like you said, you dialed up the trick play on the punts, and then you had the Mockabee throw to Ryan Brown that sounds like it was a catastrophe all the way up until Saturday, and it just seemed like, hey, we got to take our shot here with this play, and it was the best that they executed it in a whole week of trying it. So they're using Mockabee more as a receiver, it seems like, to kind of get him the ball in some open space, and that's worked a little bit. But you're right. You can't just be a team that continues to try to, trick your way into scoring some points or, confusing teams through the pass game. To succeed in this league, you're going to have to eventually just put the ball on the ground and run it down somebody's throat. And Purdue has shown no ability so far to really do that consistently. Even even that Southern Illinois game where Purdue had a ton of rushing yards, it was still 3.9 yards per carry or something like that.
Yeah, and that's why when I talk about rushing, I always go to yards per carry. Sometimes, man, it was great when Football Outsiders are still doing their stuff because they had a lot of great numbers as far as just offensive line stats, and it would be broken down by how many yards you got on a typical rush play and yard gains of 3 to 5 or 6 to 10 versus normal gains. They had some really great stats. I wish they were still around doing that. But I try to find those sorts of things because total yardage, total rushing yards only tells me usually how often you ran. It doesn't necessarily tell me how well you ran. And I like those attempt by attempt things a lot better. And that Purdue just hasn't been good there, even when they've looked good at times this season. But I think some of this is the offensive line needs to get that together. They're still a work in progress. They were still coming together, even though they were more or less that same group through most of camp. They're all still relatively inexperienced together. Some of them are relatively inexperienced or just as college starting linemen in the Big Ten, like Joey Tenona and King Coley and Ethan Trent. They haven't done this at this level. So that's still a developing area. I think Devin Mockabee's got to be better too, though. He's got to. I mean, he's a veteran. There should be some savvy there. He's had some problems in pass protection. I think that's affected how often they've had him on the field to some extent. I suspect in some of these games, and it's just everybody in that group needs to find a way to take that up a level because I just don't know. I don't know how much this defense is going to get fixed this season to become strong. And if it doesn't get to that point, then this offense needs the running game to be able to outscore teams the way it's going to have to outscore teams.
Yeah, and it really starts on this game this week. If Purdue can find a way to win it, it might set you off for, if you look, at the games coming up, those seem like some winnable games after this. Purdue is not the favorite on Saturday, but, I think Purdue's past the point now of people feeling good about, Purdue competed against USC. Purdue looked better against Notre Dame. At some point, you have to win games. And this is a game that, on paper, Purdue shouldn't win, but it's not a game that Purdue can't win. So you go out there and win this game, it could set you off in emotion and, you kind of stay above water a little bit, being 3-2. And then you look ahead at the schedule and think, okay, if Purdue can beat Illinois at home, there's some other games coming up that, maybe Purdue can get itself into bowl contention or something like that, which would be a massive success for where Purdue was a year ago.
Yeah, I think that Purdue has the coaching and the quarterback to beat someone it's not supposed to beat. I think Ryan Brown can get, if it's, you're down by 4, you've got to go down and get a touchdown, and you've got, 75 seconds or whatever, and even no timeouts, but you've got to figure out a way to make that happen. He sort of did that at Illinois last year, and he's more experienced now and a better quarterback in many facets than he was a year ago. So I think they could do that realistically. I just don't know if they're ready to do it yet this week. Because I think Illinois, I know people look at that 63-10 and think it says something about Illinois, and it certainly did on that day. I think it also says something about Indiana. I was one who was kind of coming in thinking Indiana had to take a step back, and maybe it just isn't taking a step back. Predictions. So with that in mind, I guess, what are you predicting? Did you throw a score down yet for what you think this game's going to be on Saturday?
I did. It hasn't published, but I have it being a high-scoring game. I had Illinois 36-30. So, a competitive game, and, how you get to 36-30 is, who knows, but I do think it's going to be a game that in the fourth quarter, Purdue's going to have opportunities where it's hey, this is a make or break time. And like you said, I just don't know if Purdue's been in that scenario enough yet to kind of cash in on a game like that and steal one.
Yeah, I went 30-21, which is, I guess, right around that 9-point spread is right around where the betting line has been this week. I think there's going to be some points scored in this game too. It's just hard to have, is you picking with 36, Jeremy saying 38. It's really hard to have confidence that Purdue's defense is going to stop someone enough that the offense wouldn't also have to score in the 30s to have a chance to beat a team this good, right? So I'm skeptical that this defense does that. It's going to have to be a big jump really for this defense. And if they do that, I think it would mean that they probably found a way to create some more pressure. And maybe this week off gave Mike Scherer some additional ways to sort of scheme that up. It's just you got to be careful, especially when you're playing. They played a lot more of those 3-man fronts. So are you blitzing with someone else? And if you are, then is it costing you somewhere else? I think they're still just in the process of figuring that sort of thing out. I want to touch on something you just said too, though, is before we wrap up, and that's the next 3 weeks, because we've said all along that this is what the first half of this season was building towards, was, a couple easy ones early, then a run of 3 pretty tough ones, and Illinois was in that even certainly before they lost 63-10, but I think still I put them in that category. And then the next 3 weeks at Minnesota, at Northwestern, at home against Rutgers. Now, all of those teams have beaten other capable teams this season, maybe not so much Northwestern. Minnesota just beat Rutgers at home, so those are very equivalent performance teams right now. But all 3 teams that, when you look, especially compared to the rest of this schedule, the rest of the power conference teams on this schedule, this is Purdue's weight class. This is where it needs to find a way to break this streak. And I feel like they have liked the momentum that they've been building. I think win or lose, they need to come out of Illinois feeling like they didn't take a step back as they go into this most winnable stretch of the season.
Yeah, and you got to build momentum to do that. I don't think it's just going to come out of nowhere, although, who knows, the Illinois thing kind of came out of nowhere last year. But again, that was, as Ryan Brown said this week, was kind of playing backyard football, and there was no film on him unless you went back and watched the Northwestern game the year before, where he only played every other series. So Illinois is going to be much more prepared this year for what Purdue's bringing. But, can Purdue capitalize on having an off week last week and some extra prep time for Illinois? I would certainly think that there was some wrinkles that Purdue's going to throw in there if it sees an opportunity to, because as we've seen the last couple of weeks, Purdue's dug into its bag of tricks a couple times where it felt like it could capitalize, and all 3 of those trick plays to some degree, that double lateral worked out in a sense. I guess you got a touchdown out of it, but the other 2 were perfectly executed, time right to make those calls, and ended up being at the time what seemed like big plays.
Illinois is more prepared, like I was saying to Jeremy. Like, nobody on Illinois was going to overlook this guy, and even the guys who are new at Illinois, somebody's probably pulling them aside saying, "No, like, this guy, he's tough. Like, he almost beat us last year." So they are prepared in that way, but they're not prepared for Josh Henson probably as well in some ways. Like, it'd been a long time since he started calling plays again. He has shown each week this year that they've prepared something a little bit different. They're doing Wildcat stuff in the goal line early on. They did the thing with Malachi Singleton, putting him in there in the goal line. I still am not a fan of that, but it shows that they're willing to kind of experiment and take chances and trust their players to do those sort of things. And I'm just eager to see what he has. I think there's going to be some wrinkle to this offense that we have not seen yet, that we see against Illinois, that is probably specifically designed for where Illinois has some vulnerabilities. And it's just a matter of, can they execute on it enough? So that's enough for today from Boilers Extra. That's Sam King from the JNC and Nathan Barrett from Indy Star. And we will be at Ross-Ade Stadium on Saturday. So come back for our live post game after the game. We'll see you then.